The train screamed into Silver Bluff like a wounded beast dragging its iron lungs through the dust and smoke of the frontier. Passengers spilled out in clusters, their laughter and chatter colliding with the hiss of steam, each one claimed by someone waiting. But among them stood a woman who belonged to no one. A shawl hung loose around her shoulders. Her boots swallowed her small feet, and her dress was torn, blackened by soot. A bruise lingered on her jawline, half hidden beneath the scarf she clutched against her throat. When the station master leaned out from his booth and asked for her name, she said nothing, and when pressed, she answered only, "I don't have one." The words carried no anger, no defiance, just the hollow sound of something already broken. The man at the booth frowned, but he didn't press her further. He had seen the wildness in her eyes, that haunted spark of someone fleeing ghosts they could not outrun. By nightfall, she was wandering the square, clutching a small cloth bag like it was all she had left of a life she could not return to. Doors closed at the sight of her. Children stared. Merchants muttered. By sundown, she had nowhere to rest but behind the general store, curled against the boards with the cold pressing deep into her bones. That night, men's voices drifted down the alley, drunk, slurred, and circling like wolves. One stepped closer, his laughter thick with menace. Another joined him, daring the first to see what kind of gratitude she might show. Her fingers closed around the shard of glass hidden in her boot, her last line of defense. But before she could raise it, the alley fell silent. Heavy footsteps echoed from the shadows, the kind that made men sober in an instant. Broad shoulders, a long coat brushing the dirt, and a silence that carried more weight than a shouted threat. The drunks vanished, whispering one name with fear curling their tongues. Grady. From her shelter, she saw him watching her. He didn't speak. He didn't step closer. He simply stood in the dark, his gaze heavy enough to make her feel exposed and seen all at once. When morning came, rumors already buzzed through the town. A nameless woman, a runaway, perhaps, and Weston Grady, scarred, feared, and dangerous, had looked at her. She tried to find work. The bakery laughed at her. The tailor sent her away. Every door closed the same way, with suspicion or disgust. By dusk, she returned to her corner, hungry, weary, and trembling. When the tears came, she didn't even try to stop them. That was when the shadow returned. Weston Grady, his face carved in stone, scars catching the light, eyes the color of smoke. He didn't speak a word. He simply reached out his hand. For a long moment, she stared at it. The whole town had turned her away. No one cared who she was or why she had nothing. But this man, the one others fled from, offered his hand without reason. And because she had no husband, no name, and no place to go, she took it. Weston didn't lead her through town. He led her around it, down forgotten trails, and into the foothills where the land turned harsher, quieter, more merciless. His horse moved slowly, as though even the animal sensed her frailty. She didn't speak, and neither did he. The only sound was the cry of hawks and the wind pulling at the grass. She held the saddle horn tightly, unsure whether she was being rescued or taken. The cabin that rose from the mountainside seemed half alive, its walls swallowed by climbing vines, its stones darkened by time and weather. No welcome, no warmth, no invitation. Yet smoke curled from the chimney, and inside there was food, a fire, and a cot prepared for her. Weston pointed, set down bread and beans, and disappeared without explanation. When she asked him why he was helping, he gave her nothing, only silence. That night, as the wind howled through the cracks and her body shivered beneath the blanket, she didn't remember pulling over herself. She wondered if she had made a mistake. But in the morning, she found him outside, swinging an axe with the focus of a man trying to bury his thoughts one blow at a time. The town gossiped about her, called her trouble, whispered that Weston Grady had lost everything in the fire years ago. They said he wasn't the kind of man to take in strays. And yet, he had. For days, their rhythm became silence. She cleaned, mended, scrubbed, small acts to ease the weight of existing under his roof. And then one evening, as she sat by the fire, Weston finally spoke. Eat, sleep, leave when you're strong. She whispered, I have nowhere to go. His jaw tightened, and he said nothing more. But when the storm came that night, rattling the cabin like bones in a grave, she wasn't afraid. For the first time in months, the silence held something gentler than loneliness. If you've stayed with me this far, then you feel the pull of her story. A woman erased from the world and a man who lives like a ghost. Stories like these, dark, painful, and buried in time, are what we uncover here. If you want to hear the rest of what happened between them and the storm that was still to come, I invite you to subscribe. That way, you won't miss the next turn in this tale where mercy and menace walk side by side. Her apology lingered in the cold night air, but Weston said nothing more. That evening, she packed what little she had, half a loaf of bread, a change of clothes, a shard of soap, and slipped from the cabin before dawn. She told herself it was better this way. He hadn't asked for her. He hadn't wanted her, and she could not bear to live in a place where silence pressed down like a coffin lid. But the mountains were crueler than she remembered. The air stung with frost, her legs trembled, and by midday she collapsed along a dry riverbed, her body too weary to carry her farther. When she opened her eyes, the sun was gone, and a shadow loomed above her. It was Weston. Without a word, he lifted her, as if she weighed nothing, and carried her back to the cabin. This time he didn't place her on the cot. He carried her to his own bed, laid her down, and pulled the quilt over her shoulders. She wept quietly in the dark, too weak to understand what kind of mercy this was. The days that followed blurred into fever. She remembered only fragments: the press of a cool cloth against her forehead, bitter herbs on her tongue, Weston's rough hand brushing sweat-soaked hair away from her face. Sometimes she woke to see him dozing in the chair beside her, eyes hollowed with exhaustion, but he never left. And when at last the fever broke, she found her hair braided, her body covered by a heavier quilt, and Weston sitting by the window, silent but present. You stayed, she whispered. His answer was simple. Of course I did. Something shifted after that. She was no longer a stranger he had taken in, but not quite a guest either. Their days became rhythm: firewood stacked, bread baked, water fetched, silence shared. She never offered her name, and he never asked again. Yet each night, as the fire burned low, the silence between them grew heavy, like it was waiting for something to be spoken. One afternoon, while searching for blankets in the barn, she found a chest. Inside lay a photograph of Weston with a red-haired woman and a little girl, their smiles frozen in a world now gone. Beneath it, scraps of charred fabric and a half-burned letter told the rest. Waited all night. She was coughing again. Please come home, Weston. I'm scared. The weight of it pressed down like stones. And that night, she asked the question she had feared to speak aloud. Was the blue dress hers? Weston stirred his stew without looking up. They burned 5 winters ago. I couldn't get back in time. Her throat closed. I'm sorry. He nodded once. That was all. She whispered, You didn't take me. You saved me, even if you didn't mean to. For the first time, Weston's eyes softened, and the silence no longer felt empty. It felt shared, but peace never lasts long on the frontier. Down in Silver Bluff, whispers turned to suspicion, and suspicion drew the sheriff back to town. Eli Burns rode into the hills with a telegram in his pocket. News of a judge's daughter gone missing on a westbound train. The sketch in his hands bore her likeness. To the law, she wasn't a woman rebuilding her life. She was property, missing and presumed stolen. She was hanging clothes on the line when the sheriff appeared, his star glinting in the light. Weston stepped from the barn, rifle slung across his back. Didn't expect to see you playing house, Grady. Burns sneered. You're not welcome here, Weston growled. Burns ignored him, eyes fixed on her. Miss, folks down east say you were taken by force. That true? Her voice was steady. I wasn't. Then why no letter? Why no word? Because I didn't want to be found. The sheriff's smirk twisted. That's not how the law works. You're somebody's daughter. You belong. She belongs to no one. Weston cut in. His voice was low, steady, and dangerous. But the law doesn't yield to reason. Burns returned 2 nights later with armed men. Lanterns lit the dark, guns gleamed, and the silence of the mountain broke with the sound of hooves. Weston stepped onto the porch, calm as stone, rifle in hand. She stood behind him, the shotgun shaking in her grip. Burns called out, I gave you a chance, Grady. Now she's coming with me. She's not yours, Weston said. Not even mine. But she's not leaving. The first gunshot split the night like thunder. Chaos followed. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. Men shouted and fell. Weston moved with grim precision. A man who had nothing left to lose except this moment. She fired too, her fear swallowed by something sharper, something that refused to be silenced again. When the smoke cleared, 2 deputies were down, the third wounded, and Burns fled into the trees with curses on his lips. Inside, her hands shook so violently, she dropped the shotgun. Weston turned to her. You all right? She nodded, though the truth trembled inside her. I'll fix the door, he said. I'll make tea, she whispered back. Neither smiled, but something deeper settled between them. That night, when she reached for his hand, he didn't pull away. Spring crept into Silver Bluff, though whispers in town remained sharp as ever. Weston rebuilt the porch rail with fresh cedar. She planted herbs beneath the window. Their lives were stitched together by silence and small acts of care, each one heavier with meaning than words could carry. Yet some silences never lift. Weston still visited the graves alone, and she never followed again. She didn't need to. One evening, as snowmelt trickled down the mountain, she fed the last remnant of her old life, the wrinkled birth record bearing her name, into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished. She watched it turn to ash, her past dissolving with it. Beside her, Weston sat with his rifle across his knees. Neither spoke. The firelight flickered across his scarred face, across her weary one, and in the quiet, she felt something she hadn't in years. Not safety, not hope, but belonging, fragile and real. The frontier is full of graves, some marked, some not. It remembers the screams, the losses, the broken families, but sometimes, against all odds, it remembers mercy too. And so the nameless woman stayed, not because he took her, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because for the first time in her life, she had chosen. The flames crackled low, the wind whispered against the cabin walls, and the mountains bore witness to two haunted souls who had nothing left except each other. And that, perhaps, was enough. If you were the woman in this story, would you have stayed with Weston Grady in that cabin, or would you have tried to leave? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd like to hear what you would have done.